Well, folks, as you know, I was a Game of Thrones fan. In fact, I watched every episode. I really enjoyed it up until the show completely went off the rails in the last season and a half. Well, now there's a brand new Game of Thrones series, House of Dragons. Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in. So we are going to recap episode 1, the initial episode of House of Dragons. This video is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Alrighty, so basically, House of Dragons is prequel to Game of Thrones. They make this very clear in the opener. It's taking place a couple of hundred years before the events of Game of Thrones, and it's all about the Targaryens. And I gotta say, initial episode, I'm into it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. Now, as always, it's rated NC-17. There is graphic, needless violence, particularly. They kind of went a little easier on the sex, and they went a little harder on the violence. There's a very graphic scene in which people's limbs are hacked off. There's another scene in which a woman is in childbirth and they perform a rudimentary C-section on her, and they do all of this on camera. And then, of course, all the left-wing commentators, it's about abortion. It's not about abortion. That's not what that storyline is about. But I will tell you what I liked most about this initial episode of House of Dragons, and that is, it's about the part of Game of Thrones that I actually cared about. So when I watched the initial Game of Thrones, I didn't care about the White Walkers. I know people really like the White Walker stuff. I didn't care about the White Walkers. I thought it was boring. It's a zombie apocalypse story. Everything that was happening in the North with the White Walkers was a sideshow from the actual interesting part of the show, which was the internal politics of the Seven Kingdoms. All that stuff was really, really interesting. Now, all the interplay between the Lannisters and the Starks and all the rest of it. All of that stuff was really good. Well, the initial episode of House of Dragons is all politics and very little dragons, and that's good.
Well, that sounds suspiciously like good news, Lord Corlys.
A man called Kragas Drahar has styled himself the Prince Admiral of this triarchy.
So the series begins with the king is Viserys Targaryen, played by Paddy Considine, and he is a relatively weak but honorable king. It's kind of reminiscent of Ned Stark. He is somebody who has the best of hearts, and he's acting in good faith, generally speaking, but he doesn't have a son. And he has to decide who exactly is going to succeed him. So at the beginning of this episode, he has an heir, but the heir is a girl. And just like in most ancient kingdoms, the idea of handing over a kingdom to a woman was unthought of. And one of the reasons, by the way, that that was the case is because it almost inevitably led to a breakdown in terms of who is going to inherit after the woman. If you had only one daughter and then she had kids, then presumably that would solve the problem. But what if you have a brother, which is what he has? You have a male heir who's a brother, you have a daughter. What happens if your daughter marries another man from another line? Now the line of the kingdom is changed. And so typically it was a patrilineal descent because it actually cleared up a lot of questions about who exactly was going to inherit. Because again, it wasn't bringing in outside families. The woman was marrying into the man's family. The man was not marrying into the woman's family, typically speaking. And if you look at British history, you can see how this works, right? Anytime you had a queen, you ended up with a bit of confusion in the aftermath of the queen as to who exactly was going to take over. This happened with, for example, Elizabeth. Anyway, Viserys Targaryen, he has a daughter played by Emma D'Arcy, who is Rhaenyra Targaryen, and she is not supposed to be the heir. He also has a pregnant wife, and his pregnant wife in the first episode is about to give birth. He thinks it's going to be a boy. As it turns out, it is a boy, but the boy basically dies upon arrival, which means now you have a conflict in the kingdom between Princess Rhaenyra and Prince Daemon. Okay, Daemon Targaryen is the brother of Viserys. Viserys is still, he's relatively young, but we see in this episode that he's suffering from some sort of abscess that presumably is going to kill him, which is going to lead to this internal conflict. Prince Daemon is played by Matt Smith. He's the best thing in the show. He's really, really interesting as an actor because he's both charming, but also obviously sadistic. He is the one thing that in the Game of Thrones universe you sort of need to be in order to get ahead, which is he is audacious. And he's very confident, and so he's able to just move ahead, and he makes moves, and meanwhile Viserys is sort of vacillating. And one of the things that I like about the Game of Thrones universe, it's a very Machiavellian universe, and so it's ruthless. The idea is that no matter how good-hearted you are, if you're unwilling to do the things that need to be done, if you're unwilling to be ruthless, you're going to lose your position, which is why in the original Game of Thrones, my favorite character was not Tyrion, it wasn't Jon, it was Tywin Lannister, right? Tywin is by far the cleverest person in the kingdom. He's the person who does what needs to be done. Matt Smith's Prince Daemon is that kind of guy. Viserys obviously is not that kind of guy, and so you can see this about to play out. We'll get to more on House of Dragons in just 1 second. First, does it make sense that the same company that controls half of online retail also passively eavesdrops on your private conversations at home? Big tech is more powerful than most countries are at this point, and they profit by exploiting your personal data. So why not put a layer of protection between your online activity and the tech juggernauts? This is why I use ExpressVPN. Think about how much of your life is on the internet. Sadly, every site you visit, video you watch, message you send gets tracked and data mined, but when you run ExpressVPN on your device, the software hides your IP address. That is something big tech can use to personally identify you. So ExpressVPN makes your activity harder to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of all your internet data and keeps you safe from hackers and eavesdroppers on your networks. What I like best about ExpressVPN, it's really easy to use. Like, check this out. So I just open up my phone, and right now I've opened up ExpressVPN, but it says, sadly, I'm not connected, which means I am subject to the predations of others. But now, I hit the button, and boom, just like that, it's green. This means I am now connected and protected. ExpressVPN does all of this without slowing your connection, which is why it's rated the #1 VPN service by TechRadar, The Verge, and countless others. So, stop handing over that personal data to the big tech monopoly that mines your activity and then sells your info. Protect yourself with the VPN I trust to keep me safe online. Visit expressvpn.com/BenYT. Get 3 extra months for free. That's expressvpn.com/BenYT. Meanwhile, the right hand to the king, Otto Hightower, is played by Rhys Ifans, really a good actor, and he sees the threat that Daemon represents.
Your Grace, this is the last thing any of us wish to discuss at this dark hour, but I consider the matter urgent.
What matter?
That of your succession.
And so he is trying to manipulate so that it is not Prince Daemon. He's very worried that Prince Daemon is going to take over the kingdom. And so after Viserys' wife dies in childbirth, Otto Hightower takes his daughter and basically gives his daughter to the king, presumably in order so that they are going to make a new line and a new possible heir. And so that will be sort of the third wing, you would assume, in future episodes of this battle. As if you fast forward into the future, presumably you will see Viserys having a son with Otto Hightower's daughter. That'll be one possible heir. You'll see Rhaenyra, who's been named as the heir. That'd be the second possible heir. And you have Prince Daemon, who's the third possible heir, right? So you're going to see this sort of tripartite battle inside the Targaryen dynasty for who's going to take over. And then, of course, there is a fourth wing that might also take over. And this is the wing led by Lord Corlys Velaryon. All of this is, internal politics that's really, really interesting. And then, of course, you got the wonderfully shot jousting scenes and battle scenes and all the rest of this. Now, one of the things that I'm liking the best about at least the first episode is that you're not getting a lot of the things that the cast and crew and writers and media were saying about this, which is that it was going to be entirely political. It was really about Trump. It was really about some other political story. It was really about transgenderism. It was really about the status of gay people. You're not getting that. What you're getting is a straight political drama. And it's quite possible that they're going to bring in these elements. But one of the things the original first few seasons of Game of Thrones did best is that it didn't focus in particularly on a clash of moral values as much as it did on these sort of ways in which power is achieved and legitimacy is derived. And if House of Dragons sticks with that, I think it could be really, really interesting. So far, so good. I think that it's very compelling TV. And I look forward to seeing what comes next.